is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I am Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Andrew, for the past few weeks, I feel like all we've been talking about is what's going on in the market and the political world. Unsurprisingly, all of a sudden, Bitcoin and Web3 have become a campaign issue, and both parties now are, it looks like, trying to sort of reset the conversation with the industry. We talked about Trump last week, the guy who apparently tried to ban Bitcoin in his first term, who's warmed up to the industry, no surprise, because he loved the idea of NFTs of himself. That's the leading theory as to why he's changed his tune. Maybe that, and also industry insiders are going to give his campaign a lot of money. And even the Harris campaign is talking about, resetting things and trying to find a productive way forward. So, look, politicians love to make promises. We'll see if any of that leads to follow through, regardless who comes into power. But let's change back to one of our favorite topics, which is talking about blockchain technologies. There's been a bit of chatter, discourse about Ethereum and Solana and different layer ones and different sort of philosophies to scaling blockchains. But one thing that listeners of this show will know we like to talk about is the Cosmos ecosystem. This is the ecosystem that began really before almost any other than Ethereum, launched in 2016, one of the first sort of token sales. And it has a very different philosophical approach to how we think about applications, what kind of control developers should have over their destiny, really. And it's offering sort of an antidote to this sort of monolithic layer one thesis. And we've seen in the past some really notable projects choosing Cosmos over traditional sort of platforms, I guess, if you want to call it, like Ethereum, because they see more opportunity to sort of manage and control what their future looks like. We had Charles DeHozy, the CEO of the DYDX Foundation, on, right, to talk about this. And there have been other high-profile projects recently that have shared their plans to at least move to Cosmos as well as others, or maybe to migrate altogether. So, we like to talk about it at a high level. And we're looking at it from the perspective of either an investor, in your case, as a builder, looking at which protocols and technologies you want to use in order to scale your application. But I thought it would be really helpful today to get the perspective of someone who's really on the inside and can tell us the thought process and the deep dive into how Cosmos works, how the broader Interchain community works, the Interblockchain Communication Protocol, IBC. And that person is here with us today. So let's please welcome Susannah Evans. She is the IBC Product Lead at the Interchain Foundation. Before the Interchain Foundation, Susannah was a managing director at Zero-Knowledge Validator. She holds a master's in engineering and a Ph.D. in engineering from Cambridge University. So she's no slouch. And just for everyone's benefit, the Interchain Foundation is a Swiss nonprofit that funds, stewards, and advances the Interchain. And I guess we're going to get a proper definition of that from Susannah, but this is the sort of constellation, if you will, of different chains that are part of this ecosystem. And through their grants, investments, and ecosystem stewardship, the Interchain Foundation is shaping a new technology paradigm that is open source, interoperable, and community owned. Over 50 blockchains currently use the Interchain stack, each with its own sovereign community and ecosystem of applications and services. So first off, Susannah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
So how did someone who's got a PhD in manufacturing engineering from Cambridge University end up in the blockchain space? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
So I actually first got interested in blockchain during my PhD. You don't really get, at least I didn't get, there are some stipends which are more generous than others, but my stipend wasn't so extensive, and I could see a few people I knew around me making a lot of money from investing in blockchain. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try and make a little bit of money on the side. And then I kind of looked into things in a bit more detail, because obviously if I was going to start paying and buying tokens and stuff like that, I wanted to know what it was all about. And that's when I actually started to realize, okay, there's actually something here. And kind of from then, that was like 2019, then I thought that this is like, something seems really interesting about this space. And I was previously going to, I don't know, kind of work in like biotech or the pharmaceutical industry. But then I was like, okay, maybe I want to work on something that's a bit faster paced. And that was one thing that was definitely clear from, you know, that whole biotech research, pharmaceutical space, that things move a lot slower. And so, yeah, I just kind of developed the interest there. And then when I was working at ZK Validator, I was exposed to a lot of different proof of stake networks. And the Cosmos architecture was really interesting to me. It seemed like something genuinely different in the space, especially from first kind of learning about Ethereum. And yeah, then I found myself here.
So you started off by seeing all your friends getting rich, and so you got hooked into a bunch of coins, and then hopefully you made a little bit of money and realized maybe I should look into what this technology really is, basically.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, I know that sounds like a, you know, people have some really cool stories, but I think that's just the honest truth of it. And
I bet you behind all those like cool stories that people tell, that's the real story for a lot of them, honestly.
Yeah, I
So
wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, you didn't go straight to Interchain, right? So you said that before the Interchain Foundation, you were at ZK Validator. So that's Zero-Knowledge Validator. Now, we got a lot of crypto native people that listen to the show, but we have other people who maybe aren't familiar with the term. So Zero Knowledge, what's that about? What was ZK Validator doing exactly?
So they are kind of like a mission-driven validator. They validated on a bunch of different like proof of stake networks, and they had a kind of core mission that they could reinvest some of the money that they generate from validating into privacy technology, specifically interested in zero-knowledge proofs. And zero-knowledge proofs are, well, they're quite like, it always seems like they're becoming popular or not, but it's basically a way to prove that you know a certain piece of information without revealing what that information is. And we see the technology is used in scaling solutions, but I think the zero knowledge aspect is really linking to the privacy element of it. And so, yeah, they kind of really saw that the future of blockchain requires privacy to reach, you know, mass adoption. So, yeah, that was their kind of thesis. And then they reinvested, they ran some grants, funded, like had direct investments, and generally just, a lot of events and initiatives to try and further that cause.
Very cool. And so with the Interchain Foundation, what's the deal there? Like, what does your day-to-day look like? Do you go into an office? Are you like, you know, punching the clock? Do all the trainers get together and, you know, brainstorm? Like, what exactly is going on over there at the Interchain Foundation?
So the Interchain Foundation is like a Swiss entity, but then there is a German entity, which is kind of a subsidiary of the foundation. Yeah. And then we have a few people who are based in Berlin, and there's a few people on my team who are actually in Berlin. So we have like a hybrid working style, but then, you know, it's the blockchain industry, so everything's kind of remote first. But yeah, so there's kind of this, there's all of the Interchain Foundation operational stuff, like the funding program, paying for a lot of the open source software, which is powering all, like the Cosmos ecosystem essentially. And then they have the IBC team, who's within the ICF, and we're essentially another core development team, because they have like a decentralized development model. So they have lots of teams from different entities and organizations who are all contributing to the open source software that's used by all of these app chains in the Cosmos ecosystem.
What is the closest analogy that you can provide for like the Interchain Foundation for people who might be familiar with non-blockchain? Is it kind of like Linux? Like, is it, it's open source, this open source sort of organization that helps to steward this kind of global resource of, the IBC, such as it is, right? So there's all these people doing their own stuff, building their own apps, launching assets on chain, and blah, blah, blah. But there's got to be someone there to sort of steer it in the right direction. Or is that the right analogy to use?
Yeah, so I think, it's a foundation, right? And essentially the foundation has the mission to fund this technology and software that's going to build these sovereign communities and the Interchain. So yeah, you could relate it to the Linux Foundation, but I think that there's a lot of nuance in how the foundations are run. Like, for example, I know that the Linux Foundation has this membership model, whereas the ICF doesn't have that model, and they actually have a lot of their treasury was raised. They were given like 10% of the kind of Atom fundraise to deliver on this mandate of funding open source technology for the Interchain, and they've essentially like grown the treasury or invested in other things in the meantime, and also spent a lot of that money. But it's not in the same sense as having like a subscription or membership model. Maybe that will change. I don't know. But yeah, it's a little bit different in that regard.
Yeah, interesting. Andrew, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm having a difficulty here. I want to know more also about like what types of things are on the roadmap that you're extremely excited about in terms of like allowing more chains to get integrated into the Interchain. Like, we talked a little bit offline about how that's like one of the things you're most excited about. And so, I would love to learn a little bit more about the roadmap over the next kind of 12 months.
So let's take a step back of like to explain the motivation. So the Interchain, you mentioned, there's like 50 plus chains. There's actually over 100 chains which currently interoperate with each other using IBC. And that's been really cool to see. But maybe a big restriction has been that IBC is really only native for blockchains with a very specific architecture. So that's chains using Comet BFT, Tendermint, the Cosmos SDK, and then they can just use IBC Go, which is the module we work on. And really our vision is that people should be able to build their blockchain how they want to build it. They shouldn't be confined to like, a restricted set of modules and requirements that they must use. And the Interchain has basically lots of different blockchains who are using this tool set, but we really want to think bigger and beyond that. For example, like there's a lot of activity happening with people building blockchains using an EVM, and IBC is not really natively supporting connections with those kind of chains. So given that, and the fact that a lot of the efforts to bring IBC to new ecosystems were just taking a really long time, like frankly, the protocol was somewhat difficult to work with. It wasn't getting easier unless we did something about that, right? So we've essentially, where we're working on now is changing the protocols to simplify it. So we're removing some of the abstraction layers. We'll make it easier for people to deploy their own custom applications. And fundamentally, we're going to reduce the implementation to be, if you have a light client, you can essentially deploy IBC with like 3 smart contracts. You could have the router, the light client, and the application that you want to use. So like transfer. So we hope that this is going to be like a huge reduction in complexity and actually make it viable to have connections to Ethereum or other layer 2s using an EVM. And we will actually be working on the EVM implementation ourselves as a team. Is that with like Polaris? Is that like the SDK package that you guys are working on? Because I know Berachain, which is sort of, we've talked a little bit about Berachain on the podcast. I believe they're using Polaris to launch kind of like one of the first
or I guess sort of a new Cosmos EVM chain. Is that sort of related to that, or is that something different?
So it's different. So Polaris is the EVM equivalent or EVM compatible. I'm not sure. They've basically developed their own EVM module to use with their on their chain, on Bearer chain. But what we're working on is just an implementation of IBC, which would work in an EVM. So you could deploy that implementation on Polaris. And we're also working on, the changes on the Go side, because, one of the things which is powerful about IBC, at least in the Cosmos ecosystem, is its network effect, right? Like, it has so many chains connected, and a lot of the time people want to build in Cosmos because of the power of IBC. So obviously you have to make sure that that's like a smooth transition. But really, we want to offer people more because we just want to make the protocol more extensible. It's not just about like connecting to this kind of subset of chains, only Cosmos chains. We actually want to have, a more broader view of the blockchain ecosystem as a whole.
And one of the projects we also had on recently is Noble. So I believe So is that because we had a really interesting conversation with them, because they were essentially building like a USDC Cosmos chain that's connected through the IBC, and therefore can kind of power stablecoins for the whole, like all kind of IBC connected chains. And it's actually supported by like the Circle team directly, which I thought was really, really interesting. So how do you think about, is the idea there to essentially, like, IBC is kind of in the sort of perception of the Interchain Foundation, IBC is like the most secure sort of bridging protocol, whatever, interoperability protocol, I don't know what to call it. And we're sort of in a world where bridges are like, I would say, the weak point in the crypto ecosystem. I don't know if you agree with that, but they're definitely like the fleshiest targets for hackers to target, besides kind of DeFi protocols. So is the idea now with sort of within this sort of roadmap is to try to bring IBC to like every chain essentially, or is like, how does that, like, what does the future look like in your eyes, I guess, in sort of like an ideal world? Is it kind of like every chain connected to through IBC, and therefore that's allows for like seamless and much more secure sort of bridging of assets and whatnot?
Yeah, so the vision for us is blockchains should be able to communicate with whatever counterparty they want to in a peer-to-peer way. And they should be able to do that by only having to trust the consensus of the two blockchains that want to communicate. So like, if I am Noble and I want to communicate with Ethereum, for us, like, our vision is that Noble should be able to directly communicate with Ethereum, and you only need to trust the Noble validator set and the Ethereum validator set. And in IBC, you do that with light clients, which is basically an on-chain representation of your counterparty's validator set and consensus algorithm. So you can track the consensus of the counterparty on your chain and verify it. And I think you pointed out, like, bridges are a huge target because, they attract a lot of capital. People lock their funds to then go to another place. And I think whenever there's a lot of money locked in the contract or an escrow account or something, that's going to attract people to start looking into, those implementations. Okay, like, is there something I can exploit here? I just think money is going to, the more money you have, the greater your risk of people taking a closer look, right? But I think the problem with a lot of bridges is you don't have this peer-to-peer connectivity. You have to trust a third party, whether that's some kind of an additional validator set. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear the siren. Sorry, I'll just wait for it to pass. So you have to trust someone else to verify that, like, I actually want to send these tokens from chain A to chain B. and someone is acting as an intermediary to say, yes, this happened on chain A, and yes, chain B actually received those tokens. And I think those systems can just be more fragile. It's like, essentially you might have a multi-sig or something, or the security guarantees are not the same as just verifying the consensus of who you want to talk with directly. And that's kind of the core premise of IBC. I think as well, like the success of more broadly, if you just like remove IBC as a component, I think that's the long-term future of like blockchain interoperability. At least on like a settlement level, like maybe for an end user, there's increasingly people using like solver networks and attempts and things like that. But I think for like the long-term future, you have to enable this peer-to-peer connectivity, only trusting the two like peers that you actually want to communicate. And I think IBC has like the opportunity to, fulfill that vision. But I think if there is that vision fulfilled in some way, I think that's still a win for the entire blockchain space. I think right now there's also a problem with a lot of value is just extracted by these third parties. And then this creates kind of like walled gardens of like, okay, you can only reach this domain through this like trusted party who's then going to charge you a massive fee to actually get there. And I don't think that's like the long-term end state of the blockchains generally.
So,
and then, yeah,
go ahead, Andrew. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just had one other question real quick. We talk a lot about on this podcast about how we're kind of on like we think like the third wave of smart contract chains. So like the first wave was Ethereum, all about security, kind of sort of the only real smart contract chain that's kind of won that vertical in a way. And then the second wave, which we're kind of in, I would say like the later stages of, maybe like middle to later stages, is still kind of like generic one side, like generic chains, but focus more on scalability versus security. So things like, Arbitrum, all the L2s, Solana, things like that. And we're sort of entering like the third phase, which is like we call them either like people call them app chains. You can think of them as thematic chains. So instead of being like purpose-built, instead of being general purpose, it's more like chains that are built for a very specific purpose. So things like, DYDX is a good example. It's a chain that's designed purely for derivatives trading. It has like very unique features relative to that, like, effectively gasless. And the idea is like the chain will make money through trading fees instead. But one of the issues with app chains, beyond just like the distribution issues of like a kind of being confined to your own ecosystem, is the fact that there's almost inherently a lower economic security for app chains because they're very limited to one specific use case versus something like Arbitrum, which has thousands of applications and just a much higher sort of the Arbitrum token's worth billions of dollars, and or like Solana, things like that. I guess my question is, do you think IBC is going to be like the big unlock for these app chains to essentially bootstrap enough security such that people will want to, will actually see real flows and sort of assets move to these types of sort of smaller ecosystems? Because I know like one of the things that was big on the Cosmos roadmap last year was this idea of like shared security, where chains could essentially bootstrap their own validator set using sort of the Cosmos validator set. So I guess my question is more like a prediction, or I don't know if you want to sort of like riff off it, but is that kind of like one of the is the idea of like IBC targeting enabling smaller chains to rapidly bootstrap, or is the idea to like integrate with like already big well-established chains to sort of make it easier to seamlessly bridge between them?
So I think maybe it's somewhat idealistic, but I think with genuine interoperability, like your strategy shouldn't be, it's hard to move your assets off my platform, right? that shouldn't be your main deciding factor on whether you keep your assets somewhere or not. The main deciding factor to me should be, is this genuinely the best application for me as an end user to be using to serve like my specific use case or purpose? And I think, as you said, like we've been in this paradigm of essentially generic block space, and layer twos are just more generic block space, right? Like they are it's just basically an EVM now plugged into Ethereum with cheaper fees, right? I'm not sure that that's like really like something that has long-term differentiation, right? I think, in technology, you see all the time, like if you don't innovate and have something that's actually different for your user to use, like why will you still be around in 10, 20 years time? So that's one point where, I mean, okay, yeah, on Arbitrum, you might have a bunch of applications, but what's actually the benefit to all of these applications of being on Arbitrum over being on Ethereum or Base or like they're all kind of essentially offering the same value proposition to people deploying their application there. Whereas that, and also like maybe to note is that you're deploying on top of their platform. Like what happens if your application like has low traction, has so much product market fit that it's actually now worth more than that platform itself? Or does the platform actually determine like this is essentially your like ceiling of growth? So I think if you then go back to, okay, if we actually achieve genuine interoperability where people can seamlessly move to whatever is actually like the best for their use case, then I don't see why generic block space is going to be like, giving you something that's long-term lasting. And I mean, you see a lot of these things where people deploy these incentive programs and great, like you get a bunch of users and traction in the duration of that incentive program, but it's not sticky, right? It's just like the draw is like, okay, I'm going to get a bunch of tokens for doing this thing, rather than like there's actually an application I love using here. And I think app chains plus genuine interoperability, like hopefully powered by IBC, because I think one element for there to be genuine interoperability is there has to be like no rent extraction, I think. Otherwise you get this weird like incentive misalignment. So I believe that app chains gives you the opportunity to build something genuinely differentiated. As to, how that pans out in the long term, I guess we'll see. But yeah, that's why I don't think just scaling is a value proposition in itself. I think there has to be something more to it.
I think that's the best definition I've ever heard in terms of like why this is better. Honestly, like the idea that innovation, there's not a lot of differentiation between these different layer 2 solutions, in the sense that like what they're offering is the same sort of thing that's maybe will become a commodity over time. Yeah. And that, IBC is something different. Now, maybe we can just, while we have a few minutes, drill down exactly on like what are the things that make it different. Like if those groups are all just improving scaling, you're doing something else. So I'd like to frame it in this way, because we've talked on the show a lot about projects that have migrated or considered migrating to Cosmos. And I'm wondering if you could sort of, if I was a developer of a new to Web3, I just graduated with a Ph.D. from Cambridge and I wanted to launch a startup, and you were trying to sell me on why I should do it on IBC versus anywhere else. Like, what are the 3 top reasons why this is the better way to go?
I think first of all, I'd ask like, what is your ambition? Like, do you
change the world and make a lot of money doing it?
Okay,
so do you want to? I'm sort of like, it's a hypothetical. It could be someone doing it.
Yeah, no. So I'm saying, I guess my first motivating factor would be like, how ambitious do you want to be? Like, are you starting this startup to like ride some, crypto hype cycle where, you need to deploy quick, like extract value when that thing's hot, and then, I don't know, move on to the next hot thing? Or do you actually have like real vision and conviction that you're going to build something like genuinely different that, I don't know, has an opportunity to really change the way we use blockchain systems and transact? I think if you're one of those people.
I'm a Cambridge PhD, so obviously I have big ambitions and lofty goals, and my motivation is entirely, virtuous and sincere. So it's the latter.
Yeah. So then it just, do you even want to give yourself like a artificial limit, or do you want to really like, there's just so much more possibility of what you can do if you build your own app chain, you build your own community, you build your own ethos. You don't have to abide by rules and constraints which are essentially imposed upon you by someone else's design philosophy. I think it's really powerful if you really have a big vision and idea. There's so much opportunity and potential that you can make it how you want. And I think that's like, to me, the most powerful part of having ownership of, essentially what you're building, but still having it in a, aligned with this decentralized blockchain ethos.
Sorry, Alex, I don't know if I think you're on mute.
Oh, yeah.
I said I'm sold. I'm sold on IBC. That was really interesting. Well, listen, Susannah, this has been a very interesting conversation. It's great to learn a little bit more. I'm once again just very impressed with the kinds of people that are drawn to Interchain and to the Cosmos ecosystem, such as our IBC. I don't know. It's got you guys have to hire fewer PhDs and more branding and marketing specialists. Because you're overweight PhDs, you're underweight marketing. You need to come up and consolidate all these different terms into one thing. No, but in all seriousness, really great conversation. I learned a lot. That was really fun. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
That's it for this week's episode. Yeah. We'll see everybody next week. I don't know who we have as a guest, but I bet you it's another banger. So stay tuned. And until then, take care. Bye-bye.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.